Dave, we've been talking about just wonderfully inspirational ideas like wealth creation the last several podcasts. And it really is. It's one of the most beautiful, important ideas ever discovered by the human mind, this notion that each of us has the capacity to create wealth for ourselves by paying attention to others. I mean, that's almost a miraculous thing when you think about it, right?
Right.
I can help myself. I can serve my own selfish self-interest by paying attention to other people and thinking, what do they need? What do they want? And then trying to figure out how I can produce or deliver or supply whatever it is other people value. That's how I get more of what I want.
Right.
By producing more of what other people want. And to make that happen, sort of the condition that's necessary for people to be inventive and innovative and entrepreneurial, the one important condition is they need to feel secure in their property. Most people are not going to go produce a lot. They're not going to invent something new if everything's just going to get stolen from them. It's one of the reasons throughout most of human history, most human beings have lived in miserable poverty. Most people were not very inventive, were not very innovative, not because they were stupid, not because they were uncreative, but because they weren't incentivized to do that. They had some tyrannical government, some leader who would call themselves a Caesar or a Pharaoh or king or some fancy title and use the force of government to take stuff away from people. So most people just kept their head down and they did the bare minimum to avoid punishment because they didn't really have an opportunity to create new wealth, to produce. And all that starts to change around the time of the American founding, where for the first time, with the United States leading the way, regimes started to protect private property, protect individual liberty. That in itself didn't make people wealthy. What it did is it said, hey, if you produce, if you're creative, the law is going to protect you in whatever you make, whatever you can earn, whatever you trade for.
Right.
And a whole lot of people said, wow, I got an idea for something that will help people. And they start to invent and innovate. And it's fantastic. And what all that really, what it reveals is the simple kind of binary choice every human being faces by nature. The most fundamental choice any human being has is life or death. Do you want to live or do you want to die? And it's a really peculiar kind of choice because if you say, I want to die, if you choose death, what death requires of you is nothing.
Right.
You just do nothing, sit motionless, and eventually you'll die. If you choose life, life means work. Life means productivity. You're going to have to get up, or somebody on your behalf is going to have to get up off their butt and go do something. Go find some food, go find some water, go find some shelter, do something productive.
And that doesn't change between the pre-America, the pre-United States era when it was you have to be productive for the king, for the monarch, or else either one of two things will happen. Either you'll die from just sitting in place, not having food, water, sustenance, whatever else, or the monarch's just going to come along and kill you and say, you're supposed to be taking care of this land on my behalf. You're supposed to be feeding me. You're supposed to be providing me gold. You're supposed to be giving the king what he needs, and you're not, so you're going to die.
Yeah.
And then into America, it's the same thing, only now we don't have a government saying, if you don't give us what you're supposed to, you're going to die. Well, until maybe right around the the turn of the 20th century.
That certainly wasn't the government, right, of the American founding. It wasn't the government that aligns with the principles of the Declaration of Independence. I mean, really what happens, that the shift that happens in the American Revolution is people go from living under what I sometimes call the slave incentive. When you think of the incentive of a slave, whether we're talking chattel slaves, or any other kind of, think of slaves in ancient Egypt who were building the pyramids, right? Why did they do that work? Because someone would stand there with a whip or a chain or something, some kind of weapon, and said, I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to beat you unless you do this work. And so that incentive for the slave is to do the absolute bare minimum necessary to avoid the whip, to avoid the chain. With the American Revolution, once property rights are secure, protected, once individuals are secure in their individual liberty, it opens up a whole new kind of incentive. Now, no one's threatening to hurt me, to whip me or beat me. Instead, it opens up a world of opportunity. Right. You mean I can look around and try to be creative and try to figure out how to produce things that will help other people. And again, that's helping me. As I choose to live, I want to be productive. The freer the regime, the more protection there is for private property, the more confident I am in being productive and producing things for other people. And so you see these two, you're right, these binary decisions, they're natural. They're rooted into human nature, life or death. That never changes. The only thing that does change is the situation around us, the regime. Is it going to protect our property when we decide to produce, or is it going to threaten our property or even come and steal it or threaten our lives?
Well, that is until we get into like I said, the turn of the 20th century, right? And then all of a sudden that binary choice, which really is a beautiful choice in a free regime, that beautiful choice of I can decide how well I want to live based on how productive I want to be. Do I want to focus on what value I can provide to others and I can live a nicer, happier life with less fear of death, of less fear of that alternative binary choice. And then all of a sudden the progressive movement comes along.
And let's be real clear, in a condition of real freedom, genuine freedom, there might be some people who say, you know what, I'm kind of lazy and I personally value sitting around doing very little. I value that more than being productive and creating a bunch of wealth and buying a new house. Okay, right? In a condition of freedom, that's okay. Make your choice and live the way you want to live.
And I wouldn't even criticize them as lazy. It's simply just that's the choice they make. Yeah. We have members of the Vino Veritas Society who are very happy, would be very happy, buying a camper van and living out of the back of a camper van in a shower that they pick up water in buckets every day, and that's kind of the life that they live, and they're very content with that.
Right.
If that's what makes you happy, then by all means go and do that. It's right. not a everybody has to be Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, the great inventors, Elon Musk, right? Not everybody has to be that.
Well, or even in a more more popular sort of progressive liberal sense, not everyone has to live in the same kind of house. Not everyone has to have the same kind of education, right? Not everything doesn't have to be. I mean, one of the phenomena we see in the modern progressive world is this notion of uniformity, right? The idea of universal education, universal health care. Everyone's supposed to have the same stuff. But when people are really free, it turns out there's tremendous diversity, that people don't have the same stuff. They don't want to live the same way because they have different preferences. Different people want different things.
I mean, when you talk about the same thing, you're using American ideas of uniformity, of universal health insurance and things like that. I start thinking about the images of the USSR where everybody dresses alike, where everybody is eating the exact same meals every meal because that's what the government is giving them. Yep. It gives you, it's sort of Orwellian back to 1984, right? We're all going to dress the same. We're going to have the same haircut. We're going to eat the same thing. We're going to read the same books. We're going to read the same news. It's all going to be the same and everybody's going to accept it. And if you're not, you're disposed of.
So within the American founding period, and certainly to the extent we can live in a way that aligns with the principles of the Declaration of Independence, meaning we live in such a way that we acknowledge and respect each other's rights. We have a government that protects our property, doesn't confiscate it, doesn't control it, protects our individual liberty. In that scenario, then, it's interesting because for someone to be a good person in a free regime, it means they are responsible for themselves. It means they govern themselves. They have some self-control, some self-restraint. It means they're also a little feisty. They're kind of self-assertive. They protect themselves. They protect the people they love. They have some basic civic knowledge. They know the nature of their rights, their freedom, their property, and they know the very few things that their own government's supposed to do, which is protect their property, protect their liberty. And they know if they want more out of life, if they want to better house, better car, better food, that they got to be productive. They've got to be kind of self-reliant. It means that you can be in a free regime, you can be a good, moral, virtuous person, and you can be a good citizen. You can be a loyal citizen. Right. You can be a law-abiding citizen, right? You can live in a way that the regime wants you to live, and you can be a good moral person at the same time. It's one of the beautiful things about living in a free regime.
Which is because the laws are just.
That's right.
Right? I mean, the foundation of the Declaration, the foundation of the Constitution is this idea that we are reasoning our way to just laws.
Yes.
As soon as those laws become unjust, then that comes into conflict. The other conflict that comes up is when those laws start becoming unjust, generally, like I said, during that turn of the 20th century, progressivism starts taking over. Woodrow Wilson takes office. We move into FDR's New Deal. You start having these conversations about economic rights. The government starts stealing from you. You start having all these questions about that binary choice changes. So for the first 100 years, 150 years of this country, you had the binary choice.
Live or die.
Live or die.
Mm-hmm.
Now you have a third choice. Take welfare, right? So now you're going to take a little bit from the government. The government's going to steal from everybody. They're going to start taking income taxes. They're going to start taking property from people, and they're going to start redistributing it to those who don't have any.
Right.
And those people who are in that middle, who now have that third option, they don't have the choice of I'm either productive or I die.
Yeah, no, that's and let's be real clear here. I want to make sure our listeners are following this. That original, natural, primordial binary choice, right? Life or death was really a choice between productivity or death. I mean, that was the real binary. You either, if you want to live, you have to be productive. You have to go do something, or you do nothing and you die. Death or productivity. And you're right. Once you create a kind of regulatory subsidy state, a modern welfare state, now there's this third option. You have millions of people say, well, I do want to live, but I don't want to be productive. Can someone else be productive on my behalf and then just give me their stuff?
And let's be clear on what productive means. Productive isn't just I'm out there creating some widget because that's just what I do and that's productive. I'm taking a physical action. That act of productivity is the creation of value. So as we've been talking about wealth versus money over the last few weeks, we've been talking about the difference of creating value versus just having something that at the moment has value, but that value can be fleeting.
Well, how about this? Doing something that creates value versus a hobby. If you do something that you enjoy, you might be active. I think you spent a lot of time riding around on your motorcycle this weekend, didn't you? You were active. You were moving through space and time, right? But you weren't really creating value for other people. Nobody else.
Not at all.
Nobody. You valued it, but you didn't create what other people value. And so to be productive in an economic sense, in a sense that leads to self-reliance, it means to create value for other people, something that other people value.
And if I want to keep riding my motorcycle on the weekends, I have to be productive during the week and create value and create wealth so that I can fill my gas tank.
Right.
So that I can buy. I got caught in a rainstorm this weekend. I want to make sure I have a raincoat and I have gloves and all of that goes into this, right? You have to be able to create value in order to do the things you want to do on the side.
Well, that is. If living requires productivity. But what progressivism, what New Deal, the New Deal brought us, and we should remind our audience, we have some great toolbox video series, one on progressivism, the beginning of the progressive movement, and then we did another on the expansion of the New Deal in the 1930s and 40s under the presidency of FDR.
Today we released episode number 12.
12, okay.
Of the New Deal toolbox. So we're about halfway through that.
And that movement, and and the truth is it's all kind of one, historians like to divide these things up, but the truth is it's all progressivism. Even what we call the New Deal, it's just an expansion. It's really implementing what the earlier progressives only talked about and wrote about. FDR actually, and the New Dealing Democrats in Congress actually start to create the programs and the bureaus that Woodrow Wilson dreamed of.
Well, I would challenge those who say there are those in whether it's academic circles or not who claim that the New Deal wasn't progressive, right? It was that wasn't the same thing.
Right.
Yet on Monday morning, or it was actually over the weekend, but it hit the news on Monday morning. Bernie Sanders comes out and says that Joe Biden is going to be the most progressive candidate, not since Woodrow Wilson, but since Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Ah, there you go.
So it's their words, right? It's in their own words.
Right.
FDR was the most progressive president we've had until Joe Biden.
So whatever,
if he were to get elected.
Whatever the academics are saying, set them aside, right? The political class, people like Bernie Sanders, they certainly understand progressivism to mean creating and expanding government programs, government institutions, government bureaus, taxing some people, redistributing wealth to others, putting lots of that wealth in the pockets of the political class and the bureaucrats who work for them. That's how they understand progressivism. And so it really is this one. Sometimes I like to say, the past 100 years has been the progressive century, because it really is a century. If you look over the last 100 years or so, it's been a century that has witnessed the great expansion of progressivism, which has meant the expansion of government, the expansion of subsidies of all kinds. Some subsidies go to individuals, other subsidies go to organizations and businesses. The expansion of government regulations, government control, government oversight over virtually every aspect of our lives. And so now what happens with this new kind of regime, and what we're suggesting here is it's a little radical. It's a little edgy. We are suggesting that the United States today, in practice, the way it works, the way people live, the way our government works, is really something quite different than the United States that used to be. It is certainly quite different than the United States that lines up with the principles of the Declaration of Independence.
Right.
What we have in practice today is very, very far removed from the principles of the Declaration of Independence. And the new way of life, the new progressive America, it opens up a third option. And the third option is, now, I don't have to choose between death or productivity. I can choose life while making others be productive on my behalf. And this leads to really a huge problem that we're seeing widespread. If your basic options are death or productivity, and you decide you want to live, you want to be productive, then the way you live is to be a good person. Being a good person, being a good citizen, respecting others' rights so that they respect your rights, producing, being self-reliant, being responsible, taking care of the people you love. All those things work together, fit together very nicely. But once we create a progressive welfare state, to be a loyal progressive, to be entitled, to be a progressive American who feels very entitled, means you cannot be a good moral person. You can't. It's impossible, because to be a good, principled, virtuous human being means you have to respect and protect other people's property. You can't be a thief and be a good person at the same time. Right. And we're suggesting that to be a loyal progressive, to be a good, devoted progressive today, means you're a kind of thief.
Well, and there's something else that evolves through that. And that is, there was a time where there were people in this country who took government subsidies, right? And we're both in agreement. That is an immoral way of life. But they kind of knew it too. Those people, they didn't feel good about taking welfare or government subsidies or government handouts. They did it quietly. They did it because it was the only way they were going to get food on the table for their family.
There used to be an old phrase in the 1930s and 40s, and it extended beyond that: living on the dole. To be on the dole meant you weren't doing anything productive, and the government was sending you a check, and it was kind of a shameful thing. And the truth is, that sense of shame was kind of healthy. It was kind of a good thing to have. I mean, you want people to not want to stay on the dole very long.
And most of those people, because of the way that made them feel, looked for ways to go be productive in society, right? They looked for opportunities. How can I go be productive? How can I go provide value to somebody? And they tried to work their way out of it. I believe, and this can be debated, but I believe there is an aspect of human nature that says people always want to do something. There are very, very, very few people who just say, I want to sit on the couch. I want to sit on the ground until I die, right? Human nature is to be active, to be productive. But when you don't have to be productive for sustenance, you look for other ways to get that energy out. And what's happened is, as the need to be productive has decreased in terms of financial because of subsidies and everything else, we started to see people looking for other ways to get that energy out, for ways for them to believe they're being beneficial to society. And that's led to the mobs. That's led to the riots that we're seeing. That's led to Portland and Minnesota and all of these situations that we're having because people do still want to be active. They still want to be productive.
Right.
They don't think they have to be anymore. They think they don't have to be productive for themselves. They can just be productive.
They don't have to produce
ways.
Value for others.
Right.
Going back to that economic sense. They want to be active, but they're not going to be productive in the economic sense of producing value for other people. Right. And and a couple of things here I want to make sure that we are really clear about what we have today in our very progressive United States. And let's be real clear about this. If we have defined progressivism as a form of scientific central planning. If you go all the way back to that's ultimately what it is about. A government bureau staffed with experts who are going to decide how people live, control, regulate, subsidize, however the elite political class thinks other people should live. And that has led what that means today is we are the most progressive than at any prior point in American history. So whatever problems we have going on today are going on in the most progressive era of our history. Right. It would make more sense to look to progressivism as the source of our greatest problems today than to look to the principles of the founding, because the truth is the principles of the founding, this is the sad truth, and this is why we created the Vino Veritas Society, is the principles of the founding have become largely irrelevant. They certainly are largely irrelevant to the chattering political class when they're passing legislation and exercising the power of government. And even many citizens don't know or think or care about those principles of the founding. So that's sort of an important framework. When we look around our country today and we see various problems, realize it corresponds with the fact that progressivism now controls and has influenced virtually everything. The other piece I wanted to go back and just highlight this. I think many of our citizens, we suggested just a little bit ago that you cannot be a good person, meaning a good, virtuous, moral person, exercise the classical virtues, and be a loyal, devoted progressive. Mm-hmm. Can't be both. That if you're a loyal, devoted progressive, then you really do have the soul of a thief. You think that what other people produce, you have a claim to use that for what you think is important or valuable. And I suspect millions of our fellow citizens today would reject that. They wouldn't get it, especially the progressives. Progressives today, if you said, well, you're a thief, they'd say, no, I'm not a thief. I don't want to steal anything. They would positively reject being called a thief. And in the next breath, they would say, I just think people have a right to health care. And I think people have a right to affordable housing, and I think people have a right to free education. But I'm not a thief. And what they don't see is the connection there. In order for government to provide free education or free health care or free anything, they have to go take stuff from somebody.
I'm going to actually challenge that as not going far enough in your comment. 10 years ago, they would say, I'm not a thief. But I do think everybody is entitled to health care, or everybody's entitled to education, or everybody's entitled to name the entitlement from the New Deal, from the Second Bill of Rights. Right. today, they're almost proud to say, I'm a thief because I am stealing from the billionaires, from the 1% who don't deserve that money,
Right.
who didn't earn that money. They earned it on the backs of their workers.
Right.
They have no comprehension of what went into building that business, right? What was Steve Jobs doing in his garage, and the learning that had to take place, and the conversations that had to take place, and the going out and finding investors to help him build all of that information. They would say today, if Steve Jobs was still with us, that he is not entitled to be a billionaire, that nobody should be a billionaire. They're almost proud of being thieves.
You're right. In fact, there's an emerging body of literature out there justifying looting. And let's be clear here. Looting is just a synonym for stealing. It's just a form of stealing. It's usually stealing in the context of a riot or something like that. But it's taking what belongs to someone else. And there is this growing body of argumentation out there justifying looting on exactly the grounds that you're talking about. And in a way, what this is doing is this is opening up a rift, a division within the ranks of progressives, which is quite interesting. It'd be fascinating to go ask large numbers of progressives, do you believe in stealing or not? Because I suspect they would disagree amongst themselves.
Absolutely.
There would be some people who call themselves progressives who would say, oh, no, stealing's wrong. I don't want to steal. And they just haven't thought through their own politics. They don't understand that the things they go vote for is a form of stealing. But they would say, no, I don't think stealing is a good thing. It's wrong. And there would be other progressives, especially the ones out in the streets right now, burning buildings and doing all the violence.
Looting every target they can find.
They would say, yeah, looting is actually a virtue in an oppressive, racist, right, white supremacist regime, which is how they think of the United States. Stealing from the master class, from the oppressors, is positively good. It's a virtuous activity.
Well, and you're talking about looting. But now we're starting to get into the point, you've talked about this, we've both talked about this for months now. Your life, your body, your freedom is your property, right? When we talk about the theft of property, that doesn't just end at the television set on my wall,
right,
or the bed in my room, or something in a store. It's my life and my liberty. And now they are starting to steal people's life and freedom, and they're doing it execution style. We saw that over the weekend.
You're absolutely correct, and it's worth expanding on that point some, because there's a message. There is a form of messaging out there, progressive messaging, that says conservatives, freedom people, constitutionalists, those types, especially people who maybe support Donald Trump, that they value the dollar over the person, that they value property, money, material things over human life. And what it demonstrates is a complete departure from the principles of freedom, from the principles of this country. When the founders talked about property, James Madison, for example, has just a beautiful essay, and it's titled "On Property," and he explores this concept of property, and he says, of course, a person has a property right to his land that he owns, to his money that he owns, to material goods, right? His house, his clothes, his bed, all those things. But then he goes on and shows how much deeper that concept of property runs. He says things like your speech, your free speech, your freedom of speech is your property. You own your speech, and you own the freedom to speak freely, right? To speak your mind. Your speech is your free. He discusses religious liberty in terms of a property right. It's quite fascinating. He says your relationship with God, that's yours. That's your property. You own it. You should be free to cultivate your relationship with God however you see fit. And in that sense, that's your property. So your speech, your religious worship, your opinions, are all forms of your property. And then when he gets at the final end, he says, your life, your person, your body, your soul, everything about you, it certainly does not belong to any other human being. Right. No other human being has a rightful claim to your person, to your soul, to your life. That is your property. And he ends by saying, as a man is said to have a right to his property, so he has property in his rights. Right? His rights, his freedom are his property. Right. He owns them. And so that notion of life, liberty, and the free pursuit of happiness is inseparable from property. It's synonymous with property. And once we justify violation of property rights, even minor violation, why don't you say, well, it's okay to take some property from that guy because that guy has a lot. He's really wealthy. The principled logical conclusion is, well, if we have a rightful claim to his money or his house, why wouldn't we have a rightful claim to his life, to his liberty? Those are all forms of his property. And that's why we're in a really precarious situation as we've come to devalue property rights, in many cases mocking and scorning and dismissing them as, oh, you're cruel and selfish and you're careless, you're cold-hearted if you care about property rights. No, the truth is just the opposite. You're cold-hearted. You don't care about human beings if you are willing to violate property rights.
And that goes to what happened in Portland over the weekend, where they found a guy with a Blue Lives Matter patch on his sleeve or his jacket. I don't know the exact piece of clothing, and a group of rioters, protesters, Antifa, BLM, you call them whatever you want. I don't even know how to classify the different groups anymore. They corner him, and you can hear the audio on some of these recordings of, we got him, get over here, we got him. And they execute him.
Yeah.
Because he believes something different. His property in his life didn't matter anymore.
Right.
And I don't want to make light on that to take it in a slightly other direction, but there's the idea of intellectual property too that I think we've started to confuse, right? We've started to get to a point in society where they don't think that's theft, right? If you steal somebody's intellectual property, but it's for the greater good, whatever the greater good actually means, that's okay. And the best example of that is medicine. You have these pharma companies who everybody wants to hate, and everybody says, oh, the pharmaceutical companies are just out to get rich and everything else. But
let's make clear, to make a profit, right. and they spit that word out, profit, as if that's just the most the grossest, heinous form of evil there is. Profit.
So they go out and they're trying to make a profit, and they're trying to get rich. Nobody thinks about the billions that are spent in R&D.
Right.
Nobody thinks about the billions that it costs to take a product to market, to go through all of the government regulations to get something approved. And now we're trying to get to a solution to the coronavirus, right? We're looking for not antibiotics. What's the term that you take, the medication you get for
a remedy?
No,
a solution, a cure?
No, the vaccine.
The vaccine.
We're looking for a vaccine for coronavirus.
Right.
And there's this assumption among tens of millions of Americans that when that vaccine becomes available,
they have a right to it.
We should all get it for free.
Yep.
We all have a right to it. Now, the problem is it got all convoluted because the government's been paying all these companies to go develop it. So now there are some questions, right? Our tax dollars are actually paying for the creation of this vaccine. Right. So do we all have a right to it if we've already paid for it? If you had just told all these companies, hey, we need a vaccine and you can charge what you need to charge for it.
Well, let's be clear. Let's talk like economists. If individuals said, I value a vaccine, I will pay up to several $100s, several $1,000s for a vaccine. If large numbers of people were saying that, you can bet your bottom dollar there would be entrepreneurs and inventors and innovators figuring out how to develop the vaccine. A guy I've done a lot of business with, he has a phrase he loves to repeat, and that is capitalism hates a void. And it's true, right? If there's a big demand for something, if people want something and it's not being supplied, that void is not going to last very long. Somebody is going to figure out how to supply and produce what they want.
It goes back to we were about 5 years ago that the EpiPen raised their prices, and everybody was up in an uproar. How can you raise your prices? It's for people need this. How can you be so greedy and want your profit? But if they didn't get the profit, what was their incentive, right? It goes back to the last couple of podcasts. What was their incentive to go invest in R&D and to actually create and go through the regulatory process? You have to incentivize people, and there has to be incentive to put in the work.
And the other piece of that, of course, remember, we are in the most progressive era of American history. Government is not only subsidizing more than ever, it's also regulating and controlling, which creates monopolies, which creates certain regulatory protection for certain industries, for certain businesses like EpiPen.
Yes.
So when EpiPen says, "Hey, we're gonna jack our prices up to $600 per unit," the first question people should ask is, well, why aren't there competitors out there offering a better product at a lower price? And the answer is the regulations have created a virtual monopoly for EpiPen. There are no competitors out there, which makes it easier for EpiPen then to charge whatever they want to charge.
Right. So we've gotten through this whole thing. We've talked about this idea of we had this binary choice. Now there's a third middle ground.
Yeah.
If you're advocating for that third middle ground, you are in effect a thief. You are stealing from other people, whether you're using the force of government to do it or you're just walking into a store and saying, I'm entitled to that television. I saw somebody walking out on the news, walking out of a store with a mattress a few weeks ago. I'm entitled to this mattress. I shouldn't have to pay for it.
Well, and let's be real clear about this, because that visual is wonderful. Someone breaks a window in a store, walks in, picks up a mattress, right? Because they think, I'm entitled to that. And I suspect, we were talking before, this division within the ranks or among the ranks of progressives. There are progressives, there are self-proclaimed progressives who would say, that was wrong, that's stealing. And there are other progressives who would say, no, that guy absolutely was right to take that mattress because America's an oppressive regime, and that company that sells mattresses is right. They're basically working with slave labor and with their employees. However we think about that scenario of that person stealing that mattress, I suspect most of our fellow citizens think about government programs, government entitlement programs, government subsidy programs. They think of those programs as something fundamentally different than the guy walking out with the mattress. And I think it's important that we make clear it is not fundamentally different. It is fundamentally the same thing. The only thing that's different is the process that you go through. Rather than a few people throwing bricks through a window and walking in and grabbing it, they have an election, right? They elect politicians who pass a law, who raise taxes, backed up by agents with guns who come and take your money to then give to other people. It's the same thing.
Let's give the perfect example of that in the last 2 or 3 years. The government started, like I said, a handful of years ago, started handing out, as part of a welfare program, iPhones with SIM cards and data plans and calling plans. What is the difference between the government taking money from other people so that they can provide iPhones to people who can't buy one, who haven't created something of value to get wealth in return and to be able to use that to purchase an iPhone, versus walking into the Apple store tomorrow and grabbing it and running out of the store? There's no difference.
There's no difference. And that fundamental concept is so challenging, I think, for many of our fellow Americans to understand. It points, there's so many things that radiate out from that basic idea. One is the concept of citizenship, which I want to talk a little more about. But also, it's worth reminding our listeners, we've mentioned this before, When we talk about wealth, we are talking about either things or talents or skills or ideas that other people value. That's when you are wealthy as an individual, is when you have something or you can do something that other people value. They are willing to pay money or trade you things that you want in exchange. That's wealth. And the point I want to make is government produces precisely zero wealth because they create zero value. They're not government doesn't invent things. Government doesn't make houses, cars, computers, medicines. It doesn't make anything in order to provide anything, including a vaccine. In order to provide a vaccine, what does government have to do first? It has to go take money, take property, take some wealth that other people have created, and then redistribute it somehow, even if it's redistributing it to scientists who then go, right? The scientists got to get paid. And so all government can do is take from some and give to others.
And there's two things. One, there's no guarantee that the scientist is going to be able to come up with that vaccine. That doesn't mean the scientist isn't still getting paid, right? So the government has redistributed to that scientist. And if that scientist fails, that scientist still got paid.
Right.
And so nothing of value was created, no wealth was created, and actually all we did was kind of throw away money or throw away wealth. The second thing that government does, it's not even that government doesn't create wealth. Government disrupts supply and demand curves. And that's a really critical idea to understand. If government regulations are preventing new supply from coming into the market from competitors, which will lower prices because if demand stays the same but supply increases, prices are going to go down.
And typically quality increases, improves. The more competition you have, usually that results in better quality stuff.
Right. So government not only doesn't create any wealth, they actually eliminate wealth by disrupting supply and demand curves. If government wants to supply for free, from the theft of other people, a vaccine, the demand to create that vaccine can change based on how much the government is willing to pay to have that vaccine produced. And that's why we've seen, for example, under Obamacare, under the Affordable Care Act, we saw a huge decrease in the number of doctors out there because they weren't getting paid as much. Obamacare was saying, no, you're getting 30 cents on the dollar. And you have to spend 3 hours a day doing paperwork that you could have been using to provide value to somebody else. Now you have to do 3 hours of paperwork to help the government. And doctors just said, I'm done.
And right there, you just put your finger on the pivot point of when progressive socialized regimes typically swing in the direction of just open, blatant tyranny. Because that's something, you can pass all the collectivized, socialized healthcare legislation you want in the world. What do you do when large numbers of people say, I don't want to be doctors anymore. I don't want to be nurses. I don't want to be a medical technician because I can't make any money and they don't. That's when those socialized progressive regimes then start forcing people. They start pointing guns at people and say, you will be a doctor, you will be a nurse, you will be, or you will go build houses, or you will go work in the fields and grow crops because we promised all these people over here these free things and we don't have enough people to actually supply it.
And what happens to quality when that happens? When you don't actually want to do it, you start doing the bare minimum. So to summarize that whole thing, Russia is one of the few countries that already has a vaccine for the coronavirus. I want to know how many progressive Americans are going to raise their hand and say, I'd like to go to Russia and I'd like to take their vaccine so I can be healthy. The only reason they got it so fast is because they did the bare minimum, and they have no idea if it's going to work. They have no idea what the long-term side effects are going to be. They have no idea if millions of people are going to die. But not only did they say government has produced a vaccine, they forced everybody to take that vaccine. And who's going to hold them accountable? Who's going to hold them responsible if millions of Russians die in the next 2 years because of a poorly planned or poorly executed vaccine?
And here again, you see one of the just great unmatched dangers with progressivism, with progressive socialized politics and government. And that is you have these alleged experts who are supposed to be designing, engineering an entire society. And a society of human beings is a really complex thing because the individual unit is the individual human being, and they're all different.
Right.
They all have different wants and needs and ways of living. And when those social engineers, the progressive bureaucrats, when they get it wrong, well, what do they? All they do is say, "Whoops, we made a mistake. We'll try again next time." We talk about this in our Toolbox series on the New Deal. 9 years into Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, he was almost to his third term as president. So the point is, he had been there a long time, and they had been creating all kinds of government programs, putting programs supposed to put Americans to work. They were regulating industries. They were paying farmers not to farm, and at the same time they were trying to control the economy by destroying crops and food and all sorts of things. And the single biggest problem during the Great Depression was chronic high unemployment. People weren't working, and that's why they were losing their houses. That's why they couldn't feed themselves. They didn't have jobs. And unemployment was going up as the government kept creating all these programs. And so when Roosevelt stood up in, this would have been 1936 when he was re-nominated by the Democratic Party to run again, he acknowledged, he says, we've made errors. We've made mistakes. We promised you free housing, free health care, jobs, economic growth. None of those things have happened. None of those things have resulted from our programs. And then he says, but that doesn't really matter because we care about you. We love you. And don't you want a government with warm-blooded, this is the language he uses, warm-blooded, caring liberals, New Deal liberals, rather than conservatives who are frozen in icy indifference, who don't care if you live or die. We care, and we're putting our best people to work 24 hours a day. I promise you we're going to get these programs right, and then everything's going to be better. And by golly, that was persuasive. It continues to be persuasive to huge numbers of Americans who think, man, as long as the liberals and the progressives in government care about us, as long as they tell us they care about us, they'll solve our problems sooner or later.
So let's take that and finish this thing up talking about citizenship and virtuous citizenship, because that was the pivotal turning point. That was the moment that being a virtuous citizen, in the Vino Veritas Society, we define that as self-reliant, what are they?
Self-restraint,
self-reliant, self-assertion, and having civic knowledge. Right. You talked about those earlier. So you have your four virtues, the four virtues of a good citizen. And there's FDR telling you don't have to be self-reliant.
Right.
Don't worry about civic knowledge. We're not going to teach that anymore. We don't need to worry about that.
Stop complaining that what we're doing is unconstitutional. You don't even need to know about the Constitution.
Right.
We're going to create these programs that take care of you. That's all that really matters.
And the Constitution just gets in the way of that.
Right.
So we've seen this change that started 100 years ago.
Yes.
When people wanted to be virtuous citizens, people wanted to provide something of value. They wanted to have a good life by being self-reliant, self-governing, know when they should follow their passions versus they should follow reason, be able to balance those two things.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden Woodrow Wilson started, but then FDR really took that and said, don't worry about any of those things. Just do what we tell you to.
Right.
And we'll make sure you're in that middle area. It's no longer a life or death. It's no longer a binary choice. And while that's less scary for a lot of people, that's how we've ended up where we are today.
That's right. It's no longer productivity or death. It's now you can be alive, you can live, but you don't have to be productive. We are going to subsidize it. And that seems like a really easy path. Bottom line is that makes sense, that a lot of people want that. They ask for that. And it's one of the reasons that we're going to continue having the kind of big progressive government headed by progressive leaders, a term that we're talking about here in our case study this month. We will continue having that until there is a cultural shift, until large numbers of Americans start behaving like good citizens, like good people, and say, no, I don't want my life subsidized. I also don't want it controlled and regulated. I want to govern myself. I'm a self-restrained person. I'm going to protect my family. I'm going to be productive and self-reliant. And I know that government's only supposed to protect my property and individual liberty.
And you talk about that from a sense of the individual's relationship with government. Mm-hmm. We also need to think of it in terms of the individual's relationship with each other.
Yes.
Right? We have to provide value to one another. We're not just being productive for ourselves. We're not just going out and I can go be productive doing anything. That I can be active, like you were saying. But it's one thing to be active. It's another thing to be producing something of value, something that other people value. And part of that just goes to how we treat each other. And I hear friends and other people complaining more than ever today about the way that they interact with other people. People are not good to each other anymore because they don't worry about, am I providing value? Is this somebody who I need to follow through for because I'm trying to provide them value, and we need to have a two-way relationship, right? It's just, I'm going to do whatever I want and the government's going to take care of me. So if you don't like what I'm going to do, I'm going to refrain from saying anything inappropriate. Yeah. But it's both how we interact with the government and how we interact with each other.
It's absolutely right. And in fact, there's a long tradition within the United States, and even going back into colonial times, of a different way of living, a different way of interacting with each other. It's a great model from which we can learn a lot. And I'm looking at the clock and I'm thinking it's getting kind of late. Maybe we should save that conversation, that better model that we've tried and worked fabulously well, much better than the kind of centralized, socialized, collectivized, progressive New Deal form of trying to help people, which has led to what we see in the streets today, rather than people actually being free and flourishing.
Well, let's hold that off till next week, and for now, continue to be the guardians of the American idea.
No sumos custodes.
No sumos custodes.